The large auditorium of the medical school in Atlanta glowed beneath warm golden chandeliers, where hundreds of families were standing clapping and calling out their children's names with all the pride in the world. Near the back rows, Angela Johnson sat quietly among the crowd, both hands holding tightly to a small bouquet she had bought in a hurry at a supermarket on the way there. Her navy blue dress was old, her low shoes still carried the marks of long hospital shifts, but in Angela's eyes that day there was no exhaustion. There was only the pride of a mother who had waited for this moment almost her entire life. When the name Malik Johnson rang out over the speakers, Angela stood up before anyone else could even start clapping. Her son walked onto the stage in his graduation gown, tall, radiant, with his honor stole resting neatly across his shoulders. Angela smiled, her lips trembling, as if simply seeing him wearing that gown made every sleepless night, every unfinished meal, every hidden ache in her back feel worth it. Then Malik took the microphone. He thanked his professors, his friends, and the doctors who had guided him in the hospital. Angela sat back down, wiping the corner of her eye, waiting to hear one very small thing. But Malik turned toward the front row where Dr. Vivian Brooks was sitting and said in a choked voice, "I want to thank the woman who became my mother when I needed a mother the most." The entire auditorium rose to its feet in applause. Angela remained seated. The bouquet in her hands trembled softly, and one petal fell onto the polished wooden floor. No one saw her heart break in that moment. She only lowered her head slowly, stood up, and quietly walked out of the auditorium before her tears could fall. 9 years earlier, before there was a graduation gown, before there was applause in a large auditorium, Malik Johnson's dream had begun in his mother's small kitchen in Atlanta. It was an evening with light rain, the yellow ceiling light flickering down onto the old wooden table, where Angela Johnson sat surrounded by electric bills, rent car insurance, and a few bank envelopes she had not dared to open. Malik was only 17 then, saying that he wanted to follow the path to becoming a doctor, starting with pre-med in college and then medical school after that. He knew that path was too long, too expensive, and almost beyond what the two of them could afford. Angela looked up at her son, and for one very brief moment, she saw both hope and fear in his eyes. Malik said quietly that medical school was too expensive, that maybe he should choose another path, something easier, more practical, something that would not make his mother struggle so much. Angela looked down at the numbers on the table, knowing clearly that on her own she did not have enough. Her nurse's salary was only enough to keep the lights on in that apartment, keep food in the refrigerator, and keep her son from having to feel ashamed of being poor. But she did not let Malik see that desperate calculation. She folded the bills, placed her hand over his, and said, "You just get accepted first. I'll take care of the rest." From that night on, Angela picked up extra shifts at the hospital, cared for elderly patients in the evenings, and worked weekends at a nursing home. She sold her old wedding ring, stopped buying things for herself, and every time Malik asked if she was okay, she only smiled and said, "I'm okay, baby. You just keep studying." From the night Angela told Malik that she would take care of the rest, her life began to be measured by one shift after another. At 5 in the morning, while Atlanta was still covered in a thin layer of fog, Angela was already at the hospital in her light blue nurse's uniform, her hair tied neatly in a bun at the back of her neck, her eyes still carrying the traces of too little sleep. She moved from room to room, straightening a blanket for an elderly man, helping a post-surgery patient sit up, then smiling as she reassured their family with a gentle voice, as if she herself did not have back pain, did not have aching feet, did not live on weak coffee and a few short minutes of rest. By 4 in the afternoon, Angela was sitting alone in her car eating half of a cold sandwich while chewing and opening her phone to check Malik's messages. He asked if she could send a little extra money for anatomy books. Angela looked at the balance in her account, stayed silent for a few seconds, then transferred almost all the money she had just received. She texted back, "Just a little something, baby. Keep studying hard." Malik did not know that a little something was an entire week of Angela standing almost without sitting down. At 7 in the evening, she arrived at the home of Evelyn Carter, an elderly white woman recovering from surgery, patiently changing her bandages, preparing her medication, and listening as the old woman talked about her children and grandchildren. At midnight, Angela walked into the nursing home again for her final shift. Tasha Williams looked at her friend's red eyes and said she should tell Malik the truth. Angela only shook her head. "I don't want him studying with guilt. I want him studying with hope. And when the city fell asleep, Angela rested her head on the steering wheel for a few minutes while in the dorm. Malik only saw a notification on his phone saying his mother had just sent money. When Malik Johnson entered medical school, he quickly realized that the dream his mother had bought for him was not only expensive in money, but also expensive in the feeling of loneliness. Around him were students whose parents were doctors, lawyers, and clinic owners, people who came to school in new cars, wore expensive coats, and talked about family vacations as if they were something normal. Malik was a good student, but every time he opened his wallet and looked at the few bills his mother had sent, he felt like he was standing at the edge of a world that had never truly belonged to him. On the day of the white coat ceremony, Malik woke up very early. Angela had promised she would come, and he saved an empty seat beside the aisle where she would be able to see him most clearly. But as the time drew near, his phone only showed one rushed call. On the other end of the line, Angela was breathing heavily, the sound of hospital machines and people calling for nurses blending together in the background. She said the hospital was short-staffed. There was an emergency case and she would try to get there as soon as she could. Malik looked around and saw his classmates hugging their parents for photos, then answered very quietly, "It's okay, Mom. You're always busy anyway." After the ceremony, he sat alone in the hallway, the white coat resting on his knees, but the joy inside him had already gone cold. It was right then that Dr. Vivian Brooks stopped in front of him. She did not ask too many questions, only sat down and said that not everyone who was present today understood the price it took to get here. Malik looked up, and for the first time that day, he felt that someone truly saw him. From that moment on, the emptiness Angela had left behind because of sacrifice began to be filled by another woman. On the morning of graduation day, Angela Johnson woke up before dawn, not because of a shift, but because for the first time in many years, she wanted to be somewhere that was not a hospital. Her navy blue dress had been hanging behind the door since the night before her low shoes had been cleaned, and the small bouquet for Malik lay carefully on the kitchen table. But just as Angela was getting ready to leave, the hospital called. One nurse was sick, the emergency room was short-staffed, and the manager only asked her to stay a few more hours. Angela looked at the clock, looked at the bouquet, then still turned the car toward the hospital because she had never known how to abandon anyone who needed her. All morning she worked with her eyes constantly glancing at the clock on the wall. She changed bandages, handed out medication, helped an elderly patient sit up, still gentle, as always, even though her heart was burning with worry. Before she left her shift, an old woman held Angela's hand and said that God must have sent her to this room. Angela smiled, but her eyes had already turned red because all she wanted that day was to make it to her son in time. She changed clothes in the hospital restroom, used a small mirror to touch up a little of her old lipstick, then held the bouquet and ran to the bus stop. When she arrived at the auditorium, the flowers were crushed at one corner, her hair was slightly messy, and the old nursing bag was still hanging from her shoulder. The ticket checker looked at her with suspicion, but Angela quietly opened her wallet and handed over the invitation that had been folded neatly flat. She stepped inside at the exact moment the name Malik Johnson rang out, and the heart of that mother suddenly lit up as if every hardship in her life had finally been answered. Angela did not know that only a few minutes later, the very son she had run there to celebrate would unintentionally hurt her more than any long shift ever could. Angela Johnson did not leave the school right away. She stood for a while in the hallway outside the auditorium, breathing very slowly, forcing herself to swallow the pain choking in her throat. Today was still Malik's day, she told herself. A mother should not ruin the biggest moment of her son's life just because her own heart had just been wounded. So Angela wiped the corner of her eye, straightened the navy blue dress that had become wrinkled after the hurried morning, and carried the slightly crushed bouquet back to the photo area after the ceremony. There, Malik was standing in the middle of a circle of beaming people. Dr. Vivian Brooks was beside him, elegant and composed, being congratulated by professors as if she were the official family member. Angela stepped closer, a small and trembling smile on her lips. One of Malik's friends looked her up and down, noticed the old nursing bag on her shoulder, and asked very naturally, "Is this your aunt?" Malik froze. It was only 1 second, but to Angela, that second felt as long as a lifetime. He took the bouquet from her hand and said softly, "No, this is Angela, my mother." No one said anything cruel, but some kinds of pain do not need cruel words to be sharp enough. When the photographer called out, "Mom, stand close to our young doctor," Everyone almost automatically pulled Dr. Brooks beside Malik. Angela stepped back, her empty hand gripping the strap of her bag. Dr. Brooks saw her in that moment, saw the smile that had already broken while Angela was still trying to hold it together. And before anyone could call her name, Angela quietly turned away. Outside the auditorium, the applause and laughter still echoed through the large glass doors. But to Angela Johnson, every sound had grown distant, as if it came from another world. She slowly walked out to the parking lot, found a stone bench beneath a small tree, and sat down, holding the old nursing bag against her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her phone vibrated. It was Tasha Williams. Angela looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering, trying to make her voice sound normal. Tasha asked how the graduation was, and Angela smiled even though tears had already gathered in the corners of her eyes. She said Malik looked very handsome, very mature, like a real doctor. But by the final sentence, her voice gently broke. "He did it, Tasha. That's enough." Angela did not know that Dr. Vivian Brooks had been standing only a few steps away. She had not come to blame anyone or claim any place for herself, but because in that moment at the photo area, she had seen a pain too quiet to ignore. When Angela hurried to stand up, the old nursing bag slipped from her shoulder and fell onto the concrete. A white envelope slid out with neat handwriting on it that read, "For Malik residency moving costs." Beside it were old receipts, a work schedule from 3 different places. Money transfer slips for books, exam fees, and rent, all bearing Angela's name. Among the receipts, Dr. Brooks also saw an overdue bill for Angela's back exam, folded beside the receipt for Malik's exam fee that had been paid on time. Dr. Brooks bent down to pick up each piece of paper, and the more she looked, the quieter her face became. In that moment, she understood that the mother who had been called absent had actually been present in every dollar, every shift, in every piece of life she had silently traded for her son. Dr. Vivian Brooks found Malik near the after-ceremony reception area where he was receiving handshakes, congratulations, and the bright smiles any new doctor would dream of. She did not call him with anger in her voice. She only placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said they needed to talk privately. Malik followed her into the hallway beside the room where the laughter behind the door gradually faded, leaving only the steady hum of the air conditioner and the white light stretching across the polished tile floor. At first, Malik still did not understand. He thought his mother had said something that made Dr. Brooks uncomfortable. Malik thought his mother had been hurt by the speech, so he sighed, not out of anger but out of exhaustion and confusion. He said he knew Angela would be heartbroken, but he did not think he had done anything wrong because Dr. Brooks truly was the one who had been there for him during the hardest years. Dr. Brooks looked at him for a long time, her eyes not accusing but serious enough to make Malik fall silent. She asked him if he truly knew what his mother had done to bring him to this day. Malik answered that he knew his mother worked a lot, knew she sent money, but she had never been there when he needed her. Dr. Brooks was the one who had sat beside him on the nights he wanted to give up. Dr. Brooks gave a slight nod. "I was there because I had the privilege to be there, Malik. Your mother was absent because she was paying the price for you to stay." Then she handed him the envelope, the old receipts, the work schedule from 3 different places, the exam fees, book payments, and rent that Angela had quietly carried for so many years. Malik looked at each piece of paper, and his face gradually went pale. In that silence, he finally understood that he had mistaken his mother's exhaustion for abandonment. Malik stood in the hallway for a long time, the receipts in his hands heavier than any diploma he had just received. Through the half-open door, he saw Angela quietly walking toward the exit, the old nursing bag held tightly against her chest, as if she only wanted to disappear from her own son's happy day. In that moment, Malik understood that if he let his mother leave like that, every apology afterward would be nothing more than a late echo. He walked into the reception room, went straight to the microphone, his voice trembling but clear as he asked everyone to give him 1 more minute. The conversation slowly faded. Dr. Vivian Brooks stood in the back quietly watching him. Malik looked around the room, then said that his speech on the stage had been missing the most important part. He had thanked the person who helped him survive medical school, but he had forgotten to thank the person who helped him reach the door of medical school in the first place. Then he turned toward Angela. "Mom, please come up here with me." Angela shook her head very slightly. Her eyes filled with confusion, but Malik had already stepped down, taken her calloused hand and led her in front of everyone. He looked at his mother, tears falling without being hidden. "This is Angela Johnson, my mother. She worked 3 jobs so I could wear a white coat. The entire room fell silent. Malik turned to Dr. Brooks and said, "Dr. Brooks helped me become a doctor, but my mother gave me the chance to become anything at all." Angela did not blame him. She only placed her hand on her son's cheek and whispered, "Then use that degree to heal people, son." A few months after graduation day, Malik Johnson began his first year of residency at a major hospital in Atlanta. His work schedule was packed and nights with little sleep gradually became familiar. But on every rare free weekend, Malik drove to a small community clinic in the middle of a working-class neighborhood. There he met mothers who worked 2 shifts and still could not afford medicine, elderly people who delayed medical appointments because they feared the bill, and young students who carried in their eyes the same worry he had once had at 17. Every time he saw them, Malik remembered Angela's calloused hands and understood that the white coat on his body had never belonged to him alone. With Dr. Vivian Brooks' help, Malik started a small fund for medical students from difficult backgrounds. He named it the Angela Johnson Care Fund. On the day the first sign was hung inside the clinic, Malik brought his mother there without telling her beforehand. By then, Angela was no longer working 3 jobs. She was still a dedicated nurse, but for the first time in many years, she had evenings when she could come home before dark, eat a warm meal and sleep without setting 3 alarms beside her bed. When Angela walked into the clinic, she saw a photo of herself in her old nursing uniform, and beneath it were the words, "For every mother whose sacrifice was once unseen." She stood still for a very long time. Malik held his mother's hand and said this was not his way of paying her back, because he knew there was no debt that could ever fully repay a mother's love. This was his way of continuing what she had taught him, healing not only with knowledge, but with gratitude. And from that day on, Angela no longer sat in the back row. At every small ceremony at the clinic, she was always invited to sit in the front row. From Angela's story, Malik learned that love does not always appear in family photos. Sometimes love is a mother standing in the emergency room while her child is receiving his white coat. It is a small amount of money sent at midnight. It is a pair of worn-out shoes walking so a child can step into a new future. Because there are heroes who never step onto a stage and never need applause, but they are the ones who quietly create the future for someone else.